Awesome.
Tommy, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Tommy with Free Field Training. Just a little bit of background. Tommy is an active duty law enforcement officer, and he has a channel on YouTube, which I believe has just exceeded 157,000 subscribers. And he also has a presence on, of course, Instagram and other platforms. The channel is based around training and also gear reviews. And I think why it's become so popular is because of your kind of just direct, impartial reviews of gear that is what most people want, and no fluff or anything like that. And you're kind of like the man's man, the guy's guy. And I think that is part of the appeal. So I would just want to kind of know, if you can give everyone just a little bit more as far as, your background, your law enforcement background, just to kind of set the stage for, who you are and where you got to where, you are today. And then we can kind of get into how Free Field Training even came about.
All right. So I am a cop and have been for now 16 years. And I started out in a south suburb of Chicago, and I'm still there. It's a hectic work environment, you would say here. I like to tell people it's a kind of a rough area that I'm working at. It's not the roughest area in the world, but it gives me kind of a perspective and an ability to see things that a lot of people probably wouldn't see when they're doing law enforcement in most places. Even many major cities don't have the type and level of crime that we do here, because we get all the overflow from Chicago. We're actually in Cook County, we border Chicago. And so we get a lot of that overflow. And we also have Gary, Indiana right next door. So we get a lot of that overflow that comes over and around and through our borders as well. I like to say where I'm at's kind of the armpit of law enforcement, right between Chicago and Gary, Indiana. And what that's allowed me to do is get into a lot of specialties and areas of law enforcement over 16 years. So I did field training. I've done SWAT for a little while. Wasn't any good at that. I'll give everybody the middle-aged, the 5'2" middle-aged ghetto cop was not a very good SWAT operator. I'll grant you that. But I did learn a lot through that. You got to go to conferences and trainings and get experience with things that people don't generally get to get experience with, especially brand new people. And then I got into field training, which is you take somebody that's straight out of the academy and you try to bring them up to a standard where there can be the peer of the person that's got 10, 15, 20, 25 years on the job, where somebody like me can trust this brand new person that's only been on the job for a year to do the right thing in a situation. And where I'm at, that's actually pretty hard to do. And I like to think of it as like, it would be a lot easier if I could just put a USB drive in the back of little Johnny's brain and be like, here's all the information you need to know. But the time frame that we have to do field training here is, it sounds long for people when they're first starting off. It's 5 months once they get out of the academy, but it's so compressed with the amount of information that you need. What I ended up doing about probably 6 years ago now is I started making videos, and I wasn't very good at it. So if you go all the way back to the beginning of the channel, they're not saying they're really good. They were literally shot on like a point and shoot camera on a little like Gorilla Grip tripod attached to a chair. You can even see the chair in some of the background. Like you can see the shadow of my chair and stuff. Like I'm out on scene with a chair and a Gorilla Pod trying to shoot videos. So what I ended up doing is I started shooting videos, and the idea was never to put them on YouTube. It was just to be able to sit somebody down while I was doing paperwork and trying to streamline the process of getting information into their brain. I could sit them down and say, hey, here's how you detect counterfeit money. This is not all inclusive, but this is the most common stuff you're going to find, right? Washed fives turned into 50s, people taking $20 bills. They're printing them that are pre-1996. They're printing up, just take parchment paper from the store, print up a fake $20 bill using an old printer, using an really old $20 bill, because it's easier to counterfeit because there aren't as many counterfeit protections in the older bills, things like that. Yeah. It was never like, hey, here's how we're going to find the printing presses and we're going to detect these $100 bills that have the strip in them because they're no, it was the simple stuff, the stuff that you're going to see as a street level patrolman that you should be able to recognize. And then I did, what was the next one? I think one of the earliest ones on was taking notes, because that's mind numbing to have to teach somebody it. You could teach it in about an hour, but it's mind numbing to sit down and have to front a call with them and say, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm the complainant and you're the cop taking the notes. We're going to take a note on my bike getting stolen, and then we're going to take a note on an armed robbery and the things you have to think about. So I found I could compress that down to like a 15, 16-minute video, and then I could put that video on a flash drive, plug that puppy into the MDT on the car, and fire it up and be like, you're going to watch this while I do your DOR, while I do your grading for the day, or while I go talk to admin about the 65th thing this week, or whatever I was doing. And then somebody said, well, the MDTs at work, they're not locked out from YouTube, so you can just upload them on YouTube and then click on them from there. And that's my first experience with uploading something on YouTube. And I decided I was going to make them unlisted where you have to have a link to get them. I was like, well, what do I care if people find out about counterfeit currency or how I'm taking notes? We'll just put it up public, and then I just find myself and click on it. And I did that maybe twice before I started noticing people were watching and commenting on the videos. Like, not millions of people were watching and commenting on the videos like today, but where I can't keep up with all the comments. But people were watching and commenting on me like, hey, this is really great. You should do XYZ. You should do XYZ. Yeah. And then I found out you could monetize YouTube. Like, you could get ad revenue for people wanting to watch this. And I saw that there was a market for it. I just didn't know at the time I began how big that market was going to be. Yeah. And now it's kind of become my exit strategy.
Yeah.
So that's where it began, and that's where it kind of went off to, is that now I can turn it into a job where when I get 20 years on, my hope, and there's no guarantee that's going to be, but having hope is half the battle, is that when I have 20 years on in 4 years, I'll be able to exit and go into a more private industry job, or this becomes big enough where I'm going to be able to have enough different revenue streams where I know I'm going to be able to support myself and my family, indefinitely on it, or at least until I can collect a pension. Yeah. Which I can't collect until I'm 50.
Oh, okay. So if you retire at 20, you still have some years before you can collect that pension.
Yeah. So I'll theoretically retire at 43 if I retire with 20 years on. Okay. But I'd have to have gap until I was 50 to even collect my pension.
Okay.
And that's a situation that a lot of people find themselves in now, that are looking to retire. Guys are retiring early and they're going and doing security work to kind of cover their gap. And luckily where I'm at, doing private industry security work as a retired law enforcement, there's a lot of money in that. Guys are making $40 to $60 an hour just kind of sitting at a hospital or a library or whatever. Places in this area especially really need security that doesn't look high end, but they know can handle anything that comes in the door. And getting a guy with 20 years of law enforcement experience to come sit at the hospital means that they can then hire minimum wage lackeys to do all the regular stuff, and they just call him or her when they need help. Yeah. So that's what a lot of guys are doing right now. But I'm hoping to not have to go do that or have to work, because a lot of people now we have tiers in Illinois. I'm tier 1. Tier 2 has to work until I think they're 55, which means some of the early people on they're looking at it as, well, if I work until I can collect 38 years, things like that. And I just I couldn't imagine doing this job for 40 years. It's especially as a patrolman, if you're not going to go into, an administrative job, how are you going to do this at 54 years old? The guys I know that are doing it 54 years old do nothing but complain about having to do it at 54 years old. Just getting in and out of the car 20 times a day at 54 years old is a lot. And I've seen a lot of my friends get hurt trying to push those age limitations back, especially guys that started early on in the job.
Yeah, it's definitely a young man's game. And I don't know if the average person knows the rigors, if you would, of the job that really don't have anything to do with getting shot at. Just wearing the vest, wearing the duty belt. Like you said, getting in and out of the car is a one-legged squat 30 times a day. That alone takes a toll on you. Sitting in the car for hours on end with the belt on, the back issues. It's a young man's game. And then you talk about having to maybe get out of the car and chase somebody, maybe having to get out of the car and fight with someone. And then you're talking about a very young man's game. Now, I know that not everyone can make it into the admin role as they age and it's just a matter of, I guess testing and skill and things like that, or sometimes luck or favoritism. But as we know,
Nepotism.
nepotism,
Maybe a little nepotism.
but so, but to have a patrolman on the road where, like, you're really running calls at 50 something years old, I don't think the public wants that. The public doesn't want that.
I think people are under the misguided impression that in police work, if you're not in that administrative role when you're in your 50s, you've somehow failed. But in reality, the vast overwhelming majority of people that are in their 50s are not in one of those administrative roles.
Right.
They're not, your street supervisors are still, like, my sergeants and lieutenants are still hopping out of the car 15 and 20 times a day. They're out, their job is to supervise, which means they have to be out there doing it. And to get that administrative job, there's a very small percentage of people, and those people aren't necessarily the people that are trying to work into their 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
The majority of police departments also don't work the way very large towns work. The majority of cops working in the country don't work the way, they don't work in an environment like many large towns work. So let's say in the city of Chicago proper, if you test and you become a detective, you're a detective, you have what is essentially a desk job. You don't have to be worried about put back on patrol unless something very catastrophic happens.
Yeah.
There's some big event goes on, then you might end up back in uniform on the street. But you're going to end up going back, into your detective job eventually.
Yeah.
In most places, that's just not how that works. You might be a detective for 4 or 5 years, and then you go back on the street. You might be in SWAT for, 1 to 3 years, and then you go back on the street. It's actually kind of rare to have a guy like, a friend of mine that's been on SWAT for 20 years. He got in early, he's really good at it. And, he moved up the ranks in SWAT, and the SWAT team's like, no, we really want to keep him here. Like, keep that guy here because that's a resource. And the departments go along with it. Like, that's actually very unusual. I had one friend that was a detective for 10 years and finally got out. And he said it was the best decision he ever made was getting out of being a detective because they have a high caseload here. But that's very unusual to do that. Most guys, they'll become a detective. They'll be a detective for a few years, and then they'll have to come back out and come back to patrol. And is that really where you want somebody that's 54 years old with a hurt back and, slip discs and all of that? Especially with I know you don't do it anymore. But the lifestyle that we live, many of us, especially on rotating shifts, that's hard on your body. I'm 25 and I think I look great. But
I'm 57. Look what the job did to me.
Got you in shape? That was retiring, wasn't it? Be honest. You left law enforcement. You're like, I'm going to go to the gym every day, 3 hours a day. This is great. Hey, look, I can eat salads again. I don't have to eat fried chicken from the gas station at 3 o'clock in the morning anymore.
Behind the dumpster at the Circle K. Awful.
Roller dogs, 2 a.m. roller dogs. You're like, why aren't you in shape? Yeah, roller dogs at 2 a.m. is your only hot food. Yeah, I wonder why.
I'm just trying to keep my eyes open at 4 a.m. Like, you're just trying to keep your eyes open, try not to let the patrol car go flying off the road. I want to go back on to, and these are all, it's funny. These are all things that the average person has no idea. Like, the average person has no idea what it's like to have to stay up all night, multiple nights in a row for 2 months. And
it's not even that. It's that the average person assumes that you're going to be up during the day to do whatever with them.
Yeah.
The average person being my wife for about the first 10 years. And they don't realize that being up for 48 hours straight is probably not good for you. It's normal for me to be up for 24 hours straight, to be at work and then be like, hey, can you work overtime days? And be like, I'm already on hour 27 of this being awake stuff. Yeah. And it's not turning out well. I got to go home and sleep before I can do this again. And that's a pretty normal thing in my life, that when I tell people that, they're like, well, what do you mean? You worked all night, but that's great because then you got all day to do stuff. I'm like, no, this isn't college. Right? Like, yeah, when I was 19, sure, I could be up all night and then be up all day and be up all night and be up all day and then sleep for 4 days straight. But that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way when you got kids and responsibilities and you have to do it 5 days in a row. That's not gonna turn out really well.
Yeah, that too. And obviously the science is out there now, which I think the science has progressed for law enforcement and first responders in general about the negative effects of the night shift, the negative effects of throwing your circadian rhythm off. Like, these are all things that and then of course it's harder to eat healthy the caffeine addiction, the adrenal strain. I mean, it's like I know. So like
I'm mixing as I'm mixing coffee and Bang Energy while doing an interview at 10 a.m.
just to like make it, just to make
Yeah,
it.
just to look like I'm alive.
Yeah, so like these are the things that the average everyday person, they don't know. They see the patrol car during the day and they're like, oh, it's a cop. But what they don't realize is that when something happens at 2 a.m. and you call and 4 minutes later, a human being shows up that didn't just get out of bed, that has been driving around all night for hours, dealing with different things, dealing with drunk people, dealing with, whatever, domestics. And it's almost like it escapes people until it becomes their reality. Like the average person doesn't realize that when they go to sleep at night, maybe they know it, but they don't really think about it. When they go to sleep at night, as their head is hitting the pillow, there's a whole crew of police officers now starting work that are going to be there all night long in case they need them. Also, patrolling to make sure no one's going to be breaking into your house, to patrolling that no one's driving drunk to kill your kid who's on his way home from work.
Theoretically patrolling.
Theoretically,
there's patrolling going on. Yes.
So now, and we're going to
if there aren't calls,
we're going to get to that from the FTO standpoint. The difference between, and I would tell new guys this, the difference between driving and patrolling. And I'm sure, this. So, but one thing I want to touch on that the average person doesn't know about is the FTO program. I think there's this conception that police officers have these years of ninja training. Like they go to the mountains in Japan and they're there for like 5 years learning how to be counselors, learning how to be expert marksmen, learning how to be, trauma surgeons, learning how to, deal with, children and out of control teenagers. Like that's just not the reality. And so if you can just share, the reality of training is academy I went for about 6 months, and then FTO was, I don't know, a couple of months. And then that's it. You're out on your own. And then the rest, you're kind of learning on the job. So if you could just kind of break down the reality of the training, because I think people feel like police officers have way more training or are way more highly trained than they really are, even when it comes to operating a police vehicle, the high speeds. Like
let's start with that one, shall we? Hold on. Let's start with that one. Because what I get from people is one of two things. They either think that this is many years long process and they expect that when they see videos of cops doing their job, they're going to be like, everybody's going to be an expert marksman and a lawyer, and they know every law that's ever been written for everywhere in the country,
right?
And every little podunk town and how it's supposed to work and federal law and all of that. And they also think that they're going to be a Brazilian jiu-jitsu master, and they're also going to be in awesome shape, and they're going to be able to work 24-hour shifts straight through, but they never do. They only ever work 8 and then go home, and that's all that matters to them.
Yeah.
So the reality is, let's take is it's always somewhere in the middle, right? Some people think like, well, they're going to have all this training, so this person must suck at it, and other people think you have no training at all, and these are just a bunch of idiots running around doing whatever on the street. And those are normally the people that think that like, well, I could do that. It's like, no, dude, you shot a gun. It's entirely different when it's a two-way street and they're shooting across it, and one person's in a car and the other person's standing on a front porch with no cover and nowhere to dive for cover, and that person didn't know they were going to a gunfight today when it starts kicking off, right? Like it's a huge gulf in those two things. And there's also a huge disparity between the amount of training in any particular thing that different law enforcement agencies give, and it's normally linked to what they think the overall risk factors in those things are, and sometimes that doesn't match up with reality at all.
Yeah.
So I'll give you for instance, as far as cars are concerned. When I went to the police academy, we never drove cars except for one day outside of a parking lot and a Quonset hut, which is like where you park airplanes. And that's where they had the cars parked on an airport where we did our training. We had basically marked cars for the academy that had light bars on the roof. We learned how to operate them and like basic stuff with spotlights and things. But the driving of the car, we only did with Crown Victorias. I'm showing my age now, I know, but with Crown Victorias at an airport that was completely empty, and we did evoc training.
Yep. Yeah.
And it was one day, and that was it. And then about
Can you?
10
I'm sorry,
years ago,
not to cut you off, but can you
go ahead.
explain what
Oh, yeah.
obviously I've been through evoc training, but can you explain to the layperson that may be watching this, what is evoc training?
All right, here, let me give you the experience. You and 3 of your least closest friends, because you're randomly assigned in a car with an instructor, get into a large old man car that's not designed to do anything other than be a couch and drive you around the neighborhood, i.e. a Crown Victoria, because that's the hardest thing to do evoc training in is an old Crown Vic. So my understanding is they're still used at our academy for that. Because it's like your worst case scenario, rear wheel drive car, squishy suspension.
Yeah.
So now you've got an overloaded Crown Victoria and you're at an airport that's closed down or a very large parking lot with no poles in the middle of it. And you are learning both to drive forward and backward in the car at high speeds and like kind of the proper way to do these things. So they have to start off with teaching people how to get in the car and adjust mirrors so that they don't have blind spots on the car, which I did a video on YouTube in case anybody's interested. Shameless plug. And then it's called Your Car Doesn't Have Blind Spots, You're Just Stupid. A little tongue in cheek, but it works. And all the way to like how to back a car up, because 90% of the people, especially now, just look at the dashboard when they're backing up because there's a camera, and that's you can't necessarily always do that because anybody's ever driven a patrol car knows half the stuff's broken at anyway 90% of the time. So like you have to teach people how to like actually turn and look behind them and how to use their mirrors to back up and stuff like that. And then from there they go on to teaching people how to stop a car, which is there's a lot more to it than most people understand. Going into threshold braking, how to brake until you get to where the tires are going to lock up, which is a lot easier in modern cars with ABS that's working. Theoretically, if the ABS works on the squad car, you know, you can brake until you start feeling the ABS, and you back off a little bit. If you back off a little bit, you actually get a lot more braking force. To how to weave through cones and then go. Most of evoc is being able to go from a high speed to seeing an emergency, and then how to counter that emergency without losing control of the car. Because if we lose control of the car and we slam into things sideways, something that I can test to personally, the injury is going to be a lot greater because cars aren't designed to take impact sideways. Yeah. Right. So we want to keep from having a crash and make it so that if we do have a crash, we're crashing head on and not sideways, you know, into the door of the car, which is more likely to create, you know, major injuries or deaths for us. Yeah. That's kind of what evoc is an overloaded car and then trying to do emergency maneuvers with that car. And that's kind of where it leaves off for the days. You drive straight at 3 cones, and then you have to drive around the cones and into a box behind the cones. And you don't know until the very last second the instructor says left or right or stop, whether you're going to stop before you get to the cones or go left around them or right around them. But that's the last thing of the day is learning how to do an emergency stop, which after doing it, I was like, this should be part of driver's ed, not police training. This should be a drive. Like, we should not be allowing people on, because I did it and I was like, I came from driving a truck, and I was like, well, like coming from a truck to this is okay. You know, like, threshold braking was just something you kind of like the other truck drivers. Like, oh, you got to do this threshold. You know, you got to wait to hit to the ABS and then get off a little bit. You'll actually stop faster, even in the snow. You're like, oh, that's great. And then I go to the police academy and people are running cones over and sliding sideways into the cones and stuff. Like, holy crap! Like, we should have this as part of driver's ed. But it was one day. And then we had, I think, 2 evoc trainings since then, and they were centered around the snow. Okay. So every time the department bought rear-wheel drive cars, they're like, whoa, we're going to take all you out, and we're going to refresh this rear-wheel drive snow stuff.
Did you guys have Chargers?
We had 1 Charger. We had a 5.7 Charger. We had 3 5s and 2 7s. Those didn't last long. They ended up as admin vehicles. We had a 5.7 Charger that our traffic guys were using, and then it became a pool car. Yeah. So I have some experience with the Charger. But we don't buy them as a general rule. I mean, here in the Chicagoland area, it's a lot of snow, and all-wheel drive Chargers are significantly more expensive than all-wheel drive Ford Explorers. So kind of the industry standard here is the Ford Explorer. Yeah, Ford Explorer. That's where you see most places. Which it's the cheapest entry point to all-wheel drive. Yeah,
and they're awful. They're awful.
The brand new ones are. Yeah. I said the 15, 16, 17 ones I could deal with, but the 20s are. There's just too many things to list. They're just, and the worst thing is the rear. I don't know if you've driven one recently, but the rear wheel drive bias. And so for your average person that's ever driven a rear wheel drive car, it's freaky because the back end on snow and ice slides before the front end catches because it's a clutch pack system. So, like, it's almost as bad as having a Crown Vic again, because once it starts, as you know, once the back end starts sliding, it's like, here we go. We'll see where this ends, especially if you're at speed. So if you're driving down the highway at 50 and, you have hit a patch of ice, or you're driving down a major street and, 45, 50 miles an hour, you hit a patch of ice, and that's conservatively speaking speeds. Like, you hit a patch of ice, all of a sudden, somebody that hits the brakes, the back end starts sliding out, or they hit the gas, the back end starts sliding out. And now you're doing that sideways collision thing. Yeah. The new Explorers, the 20s, 21s, 22s are just, I mean, they're bad. They're not. Ford has single-handedly gone from one of the best police vehicles that they've come out with to one of the worst ones that I've ever driven, in my honest personal opinion. I wish they would go back to their old all-wheel drive system. The transmissions don't like to pick a gear. The only thing I can say nice about them is that they stop and they go, and that might be because they're brand new right now. We'll see how that turns out long term. But the interior build quality is horrible. It's like mid-90s Plymouth in there.
Terrible. Plastic, gray plastic, everything.
And you can't see, well, it's not just, I don't care what it's made out of or what it looks like. Like, the steering column of my car fell apart because no one ever screwed it together. And that's not an upfitter thing anymore, because they don't have to get into the column to put the ignition interlock in. Like, it's going to the module. Like, no one ever put screws in it at all. It just like fell apart. What's this? This is like, it's got 6 miles on it. Like my wing mirror, my side view mirrors, neither of them worked. The automatic mirrors didn't work. They got rid of the heated mirrors, which used to be great in the winter, especially around here. So you could hit a button and the whole car would defrost in 10 minutes while you're at briefing, and you can't do that anymore. And what bothers me the most is that because it's rear drive now, the center area, like the center console of the car, has to sit so high, and the computer has to sit above it in order for you to reach the computer, that you basically get a choice. With every outfitting that I've seen, is like not seeing out that part of the windshield, or not seeing that side view mirror. Like, it creates which I'm sure for a consumer vehicle isn't a problem, but for law enforcement, like, I don't know if it's just that the upfitter industry hasn't caught up with it, and so it's causing these problems. But it's not just for fairly short people like me. Like, big tall guys are like, I can't see out of the windshield either, because it's in your line of sight. No matter how high you put the seat up, it's in your line of sight. You get to pick where you miss your line of sight out of. I'm not a big fan of the brand new Explorers. If it was up to me, we would go back like the last model year of the last style of Explorer. Just keep making that. It wasn't the best thing in the world. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but at least we weren't crashing them into stuff all the time.
Yeah,
and the drive system on them worked pretty well.
There's nothing scarier than when you're driving to look over and see the back end of your car coming around the front.
No, there's something scarier. One time I was driving a Chevy Impala and somebody cut me off. And I was driving, and I looked out the side window of my car and saw that the side of my car was heading toward a telephone pole.
Oh, yeah.
And luckily we missed the pole, but slid backward into a building. And that's supremely unpleasant. That's a butt pucker moment that I don't want to go back to again.
Yeah, most people don't realize that, like you said earlier, you touched on, the average person doesn't know. Cars are not designed for that center line side impact. They do side impact testing, but that's when the whole front grille of a car is coming at you, and it's still
not a pole.
It still doesn't work out well if you get broadsided. Most of the time, it doesn't work out well for you, and you're going to be hurt. However, when you have a thin pole, people don't realize that car is sliding and literally just wraps around the pole. If it happens, we've seen it many times. I've seen patrol officers that I've worked with get into an accident. Thankfully, the pole hit just behind the front seats, and it was 2 guys in a car, and the car wrapped around the pole, but it was toward, if someone was in the back passenger seat, they probably wouldn't be here today. So, those are the little things that, like, you got to be mindful of when you're, obviously driving at high speed. And, I would talk to people, and they had no idea. They would be like, well, you guys like learned how to drive fast like that. I'm like, not really. I had like a day of it, and we didn't even do anything. So when, like, I remember the first call I had to go to for like a choking baby, where I was like, oh man, like I got a motor, and I was driving fast, lights and sirens. First of all, no one listens to the sirens. No one is noticing the lights. I would have people texting. You'd be behind someone, full lights, full sirens, and they're not moving over. They're just oblivious. So not only do you have to deal with the people who are going to pull out in front of you maybe and cut you off, even though you're going lights and sirens, because most people who, if you're a cop, you know what the term is, out driving your siren. So you could actually travel at a speed where you're arriving to the point before the sound of your siren is hitting. And something I'm sure you teach all the guys. And, you know, that's why I didn't realize that so early on. And I was like, oh, wait a second, how's this person not hear me coming? I'm coming at 90. Well, I'm actually driving faster than the siren. So people cutting you off, and and you know, I learned early on, I'm sure you should say it to a lot of people. Rule number one is you get to the call safe. Because if someone's hurt, partner needs backup, nothing happens. No one gets help if I don't make it there in one piece. So I was always a proponent of driving, get there fast, but drive within your limits, drive within your competency, drive within your comfort. Don't ever push that car past where the car can do, and also past your driving skill. Now, I took training outside of police work, race car training, you know, driving training. I did that outside on my own because I enjoy driving. I enjoy racing. I'm a racing fan, things like that. So, but most of the guys that do the job never have any kind of advanced training for high speed and just handling a car at high speed. So the assumption that cops have that falls right in line that every cop is a expert marksman, and if someone's coming at them with a knife, can shoot them in the kneecap and disable them. Like, I mean, firearms training was like a week in the academy, and then, you know, I think it was a week. I think it was only like 4 days for us, and then the final day, like, you qualified and either you passed or you failed. And then I think, you know, during the year, if it's still the case, you know, I've been out for a minute, twice a year, you got to qualify. And the qualifications is a cardboard target that is set at some distances, and there's no movement. There's no getting your heart rate elevated. There's no nothing. You just got to shoot this cardboard target at, you know, 25, 15, 10, 5, weapon retention. And then that's it. You're done. So when people are like, how did that cop not be able to shoot the knife out of her hand? I'm like, do you realize that we don't do that? Like, that's not the training we get. And most of the cops, as you know, are terrible shots. They're terrible. Most cops I know are like terrible shots. Most civilians I know that go to the range, you know, every other weekend, they do some training, are phenomenal. Most of the cops I worked with, not a knock on them, but they didn't go to the range. They weren't gun people, and that's why they couldn't shoot a knife out of someone's hand. I mean, we don't get the training. So for the people who have that idea that cops have this high level of training, as a training officer, what do you think needs to, what's the narrative that really needs to be out there about, because obviously we've seen a lot of stuff in our society in these last couple of years when it comes to lethal, you know, force. What's the reality around the cops that you're training when they come out of the academy, because we know they only get a week in the academy, with what they go through with you to go out there and then maybe on their first shift off of FTO having to shoot someone or having to draw their weapon? What's that look like for you?
So like I said, with the car thing, is that here EVOC and car training is very minimal. And then because of the area that I'm in, the firearms training is slightly better. I'm not saying it's great and that everyone's an expert shot. And I don't think like anybody that I work with would be like, yeah, I'll just shoot him in the kneecap as he's running at me with a knife. Like, I don't think that's not a realistic expectation to have. And the couple times that you will see that happen, it's normally people that are snipers, and those are guys that, you know, several times a month are going out and shooting a long gun that's scoped, not a pistol from a holster. But we get our firearms training is a little higher here. We get at the academy, it's like 8 hours a week for the entire course of like 4 months, I want to say, that they end up at the academy. So it's spread out over the course, that's from adult learning models. We know that somebody shooting 50 rounds a week for, you know, 10 weeks is going to get, or 12 weeks is going to get better than someone that shoots, you know, 400 rounds all in 1 week. And we also know from that someone shooting 10 rounds a day or dry firing 10 rounds a day is going to get a lot better at the accuracy of shooting than somebody that shoots 50 rounds once a month. And so from my perspective for field training, I get people coming out of the academy and I get what I get and I don't get to throw a fit about it, right? Like that's it. This is the person, this is what they know. And the supplemental training I can do is just whatever I can do on the street. So I try to aim the extra training that they get on the street and what experience I give them based upon what their advantages and disadvantages, what their skill sets are when I get them. And that's very dependent on that individual person. We've got core competency things that we have to hit. And if they're not hitting one of those core competencies, then I can go work on that individually with them. But sometimes I have to get creative on working at it individually with them. I've had people come to us straight out of the academy that after all of this firearms training couldn't qualify. And there's a variety of reasons that happens. One of the most common ones is here, most places you have to buy your own firearm, and people buy the absolute possible wrong thing for their body size and skill level. So if you get somebody that goes to the academy with a SIG 220, which is a double action only, some of them, I had one guy come to double action only SIG 220, 8 rounds, 45 ACP, and he's a little guy, and he's trying to qual with that. And it's like, all right, well, they said he just barely qualified to the academy. Now he can't qual at the PD. We got to deal with this. It needs to be dealt with right now. Like you can take him out on the range with the firearms instructors, but the only way you're gonna leap over that boundary is, okay, dude, well, we're going out on the street. You barely qualled. We're gonna go under this bridge, and we are gonna dry fire practice at the center. What do they call them? Like the big concrete bases of the bridge, the footing of the bridge, right? Like we're gonna put a target up there, and you're gonna dry fire practice that target. And then once I see that your muzzle isn't moving around a bunch, we're gonna, put a 45 shell casing up there, and you're gonna try dry firing while keeping that shell casing on there, and that's the best you can do with it. A lot of this stuff, like if somebody's really bad with weapons manipulation, we can do all of that dry. With the car stuff, luckily I've got large parking lots near me, so I can set up a little evac course, steal a bunch of cones from the garage, and go set up an evac course. I had to do that with people. But the big thing that we have the biggest problems with people knowing coming straight out of the academy is the core skill sets of just talking to people on the street. And you get into more trouble having to fight someone because you don't know how to talk to people, and you can't talk to a broad audience of people from many different demographic backgrounds and from different cultural backgrounds than you can getting in trouble because you don't know how to shoot or you don't know how to drive. If you don't know how to drive really well, you can slow down. If you don't know how to shoot really well, a man's got to know his limitations. You'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to be the guy that goes around back, we're going to be, and I work with people like that have the same amount of time on as me. And they're like, listen, man, like I don't spend my vacations going to Thunder Ranch. I'll take the back door, like I'll be out back in case he runs out that way. But people have to know their limitations. But if you don't know how to talk to people, if you can't solve problems, you can't go to somebody's house because they're having a problem and then give them good advice on how to solve it, you are going to get into fights, and you're going to get into fights and car chases and shootings and stuff at a much higher rate than someone who can. Yeah. And I wish somebody would do a study on it. If anybody knows of a study, email it to me at freefieldtraining@gmail.com. I would love to see it. But from my personal experience, I can see that the people who can't talk out a problem are the ones that get into use of force incidents the most. Yeah. Sometimes we can't avoid them, but people getting into domestics and knockdown, drag out fights over absolutely nothing because they don't know how to talk somebody down or know when to escalate the situation so that we don't end up having to fight the whole family, or we put them in a position of disadvantage before we're going to go make that arrest, or wait for, let's get 3 people here before we go arrest this guy that's 7 foot tall and 300 pounds. Yeah. The people that are just like, we're going to do this right now and not think about it, they're the ones that end up getting hurt more than anybody. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was actually going to segue into what it is that you feel is one of the primary reasons why a lot of these incidents are happening. And I said it publicly. I got a little bit of criticism for it. You may or may not have seen the video, but I said a lot of these incidents where we have these people that are these officers that are getting into these, lethal force or use of force situations, I can tell, and people will say it, and sometimes it's the case, yes, but sometimes it's just the situation. But you can just tell sometimes the officer's mood, the officer's tone, the language. And I'm saying to myself, I'm listening and I'm saying, if this officer just changed his tone, his narrative, his mood, and used this a little bit more with this tied to it, they wouldn't need to pull this out. And you've probably seen multiple guys in your career talk their way into like a scuffle or a use of force situation. And I've seen multiple guys, as I have, and I've also seen multiple guys where I feel like it was getting there and they went ahead and verbally brought it back down. Verbal judo, which is the cop term that we use a lot. One of the officers that I learned the most from early on in my career was one of those guys that he was an older guy. He was a senior guy. He, for whatever reason, some of the reasons we talked about, never got promoted. But he was one of the best road officers that I worked with from the standpoint of he was so good at talking. I'll give him a shout out here. I think he watches. I'm not sure. His name's Steve Rudinsky. And he was a phenomenal guy on the road when it came to just talking to people, knowing people. So not only did he do a good job of talking to people around the town, learning about things and just listening, but when it came to like, incidents that were elevated emotions, he was so calm. He put out a narrative there that like the guy who's like screaming and ready to fight could like relate to. And it was almost like, he made it so like, hey, listen, man, we're on the same level. Although he's like some crazy crackhead, drug addict, whatever, he made it seem like, listen, I'm here with you. It's all good. And it wasn't that I'm the dominant guy. You're going to do what I say. And I saw that guy de-escalate so many situations with just his words. And I feel like that should be something that should be taught in the police academy. However, it's not. It's not at all. Like, verbal de-escalation, I think it's like kind of like glazed over. But bring in a language expert, bring in a communication expert, talk to them about getting on people's same level, talk to them about mimicking. You see someone like this, you go like this. You see someone crossing their arms, relate to them. You know a lot of this. I know you know a lot of it. Why isn't that, if it's something that can really de-escalate a lot of situations, why do you think that's not taught?
Because it's an art, not a science. And it's very hard to teach art. Ask any high school art teacher. And they'll show you people that are Rembrandt. Like, this kid's Rembrandt in the making, but he wants to be an engineer. And they get all angry about it, right? Like, he wants to be an engineer, but look at what he's doing. This kid can meet the basic technical standards, but it looks like a 6-year-old drew what he drew. I just, like his sponge is full as far as art's concerned. I can't do it. And talking to people is an art, not a science. And the problem is that law enforcement training ends up being somebody's niche, that they have this little niche that they do, and they're trying to take that little niche and then make money off of it, right? Like, I could do a de-escalation training and I could have 60 bullet points and I could teach you about de-escalation in the area that I work at. But if you work in Florida, some of my de-escalation techniques might not work well because culturally Florida is so much different than the south side of Chicago. You deal with so many different, I deal with mostly African-American, Hispanic, and Polish people. They are all mainly middle or lower class. So you've got people that make from $120,000 a year down, very high on the we're collecting food stamps and living on Section 8 demographic, right? Mm-hmm. If I try to use those same techniques on people who are retired living in Florida that have $4 million in their bank account on the same type of domestic, right? Mm-hmm. He cheated on her. She's upset, bleached all of his clothing in the backyard. If I tried to use those same techniques on those people, they're not going to work. Yeah. And I think that's one of the major problems when I see people. I'd love to see a study on it. I don't think it's ever been done. I think most car accidents happen because people come from different microcultures of driving. And then when they clash together, that's when accidents happen. Where I'm at, it's very common. If you're trying to make a left-hand turn across a 6-lane road, so 3 ways one way, 3 lanes one way, 3 ways the other, people pull out from the gas station into the lane of traffic, and the people in oncoming traffic stop for them as long as they pull out a block before. And then the next person will stop, and the next person will stop, and they'll let them through.
Mm.
When that same person goes 2 towns over and pulls the nose of their car out into traffic, they get the front end ripped off.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
in that town, you don't do that, but you do play on your phone down here so the cops can't see you playing on your phone while you're driving.
Yeah.
And that's where we get the collisions. And I think a lot of the times when we have problems where you see cops that are unable to de-escalate on calls, I think some of them are just bad at it because it's an art, not a science. And when somebody finds a way to turn it into a science, it'll be awesome. I'll study the shit out of that. Like that would be great. If I could learn how to do it everywhere, that would be great. I think they're getting somebody from outside of the core demographics they normally work with, where those same techniques and arguments aren't going to work necessarily on that person.
Yeah.
Especially like you get into canned responses, right? If I go to a domestic and it's 2 people arguing over the remote control, I have canned responses lined up.
I did too. Yeah.
Dude, is this worth going? It's worth going to jail over a remote control. You're going to let this bitch send you to jail for 24 hours in Cook County over a remote control? Bro, do you have a job? You do. You have a job. You want to lose a day of work? What do you make in a day? $120? It's worth $120 to watch Gilligan's Island instead of whatever this crap is? Bro, come on. Get in my car. I'm going to give you a ride. I'm going to give you a ride to the bar.
Yeah.
You want to get back at her? I'll give you a ride to the bar. She wants you out. Let's go to the bar. I'll drop you off 1 town over. Get an Uber home. I mean, you got money. You got a job, right? Go to the bar. Call your buddy while you're at the bar. Tell him to stop by. Crash at his place. Go to work. So grab your stuff to go to work tomorrow. Let's go. I'll drop you off at the bar.
I've literally almost done that exact thing.
Right? But that type of thing isn't going to work on the guy that's got $5 million in his checking account, like in Florida. Yeah. And I think that when cultures clash that way, that's where cops get in trouble, is that because it's an art and not a science, we've got people that they're getting outside the realm of the art that they've studied.
Yeah.
Somebody that's studied classical art is not going to do well trying to sell art to IBM.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the style of their building is not, classical medieval art. Like that's not what they want to put up on the wall. And so it's kind of important. I had a college professor who used to say, you need to stick to your knitting. He was a management professor. He's like, if you've got a company that makes widgets, you don't try to become a company that teaches people stuff. If you've got a company that lays phone lines, you might be able to become a company that, sells cell phone service, but you probably shouldn't be a company that tries to make widgets.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to work. Yeah. Like there's a reason Ma Bell and AT&T and stuff, Ma Bell around here, Illinois Bell never started making cell phones.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why AT&T isn't the biggest cell phone carrier in the country, and why they don't make their own cell phones. They're a service provider. Right. Yeah. So I think culturally, when we get cops that are misaligned with the demographic they're trying to work with, is where you get problems. I see a lot of cops from very nice towns that don't see attack cues because they've never seen attack cues.
Yeah.
They've seen them on video, but they're not recognizing them because it's entirely different. That's something the public doesn't understand, is it's entirely different seeing it in real life and recognizing those attack cues and seeing them on video after the attack is going to happen. Yeah. Like you watch the attack and then it clips back to, you see the attack cues. Oh, this guy keeps reaching to the front of his waistband, but from the back, all you see is this. You see guys walking and then he's like this. Unless you've seen that before and then gotten attacked, the likelihood that you're going to recognize that cue is pretty low.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the problem. And then the flip side of it is you've got cops from very bad neighborhoods that see something and it pings in their head, whoop, that's an attack cue. We're going to fight. And then once it's in your brain that the fight's on, now the verbal fight's on.
Yeah.
And you're expecting that physical fight. And that's how things end up spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
And a recent problem that we've had is people coming out straight out of the academy that have been inundated with social media, thinking that everyone is going to comply if they're just nice, which is something that I like to call, I like to say, they come out with the skill set of, call everybody sir, which is great. Mm-hmm. Right? I always say you be nice to people until they give you a reason not to, right? Like,
sure,
everybody's a gentleman until I can see otherwise, right? Like, hey sir, come on over here. Come on, ma'am. Dear, I call everybody that looks like they might be over 25 if it's a female, like, dear, come on over here, let's talk, be nice to them, right? Until they decide that they're going to be an asshole. And when they do, then it's, all bets are off as far as that's concerned. But I say new guys today, they say, sir, sir, sir. And when they don't do what they're saying and they're walking away, reaching into the front of their waistband with their right hand, sir, sir, sir. I'm like, well, at a certain point, what's the definition of crazy? It's doing the same thing over and over again and think you're going to get a different response. And I think that plays a part in it, but most of that is experiential based. And that's why I know that's why I stay motivated to do videos that don't do very well, that aren't especially well monetized, that don't make me a lot of money on YouTube. I do videos that I know are going to just get angry comments from people that have never done before, because I know that there's lots of places that have 4 and 5 man police departments. I know almost every security guard in the country. Yes, security guard. I don't care. But there's nothing wrong with being a security guard. We're not going to create titles for all of you, right? To make everybody feel better. But if you're a security guard, you're not I know the training's not there. There's no state that has an adequate training program for security, and anybody that says otherwise is it's silly. There's no state that has an adequate minimal training program. People say minimal training programs for cops are bad. It's like 40 hours in Illinois, 20 hours to be an armed security guard. Like literally, you take a couple of weeks at a community college at night, and you're a licensed security guard, right? Like,
it's insane.
When you have people that aren't they're not taught how to do it, somebody needs to bridge that gap with a little bit of experience, because nobody's giving them anything.
Yeah.
Like, what I'm making isn't supposed to be. It's supposed to be a supplement to what you're already getting. So I do things like note taking, or how to adjust the mirrors on your car. I've got a whole bunch of educational videos about what type of gear to buy and the realities of it. Holsters. Hey, here's the holster you want to buy, because I see guys go out on the street with holsters that are essentially a level 1 retention. I see detectives out there with something that doesn't even have a snap on it. It's just kind of press fit in there, right? And it says it's level 1 on the packaging. It's like, do you trust everything companies say? Do you trust everything the marketing says? No, man, you gotta use a little bit of the brains, right? And if you're a patrolman, you need to be out there. It's I'm not saying you have to have a level 4 Safariland crazy holster, but when somebody grabs the gun and pulls on it, you probably don't want it coming out of there, right? So I do videos like that, because that's experiential stuff that people don't know. I did one about abandoned buildings a long time ago, because people that are from nice name kids, especially, we're getting college kids that come in, they've never been in an abandoned building before. So the very idea that you could walk up the front stairs, take one step inside the house, and fall because there's no floor inside the house is beyond their comprehension. They're like, I'm walking into a house. Everything they've ever experienced before is you open the door, you take a step in. Do you ever check to make sure there's actually floor there? Well, if you've been inside 250 some odd abandoned houses like I have, you do, because you've fallen into it before, right? So it's that type of experiential stuff that I think is a problem. But when we see those use of force videos, it's people they're getting into a situation that they've never experienced before, that's very hard to train for, because it's an art, right? There's a certain amount of science to it, but I tell people who work all the time, there's no flow chart for this. I couldn't tell you, go to an abandoned house, and your first step is going to be to check this and this and this, and then when you open the door, check for this and this and this, and then you do this and you check this, this and this. All I can do is take a camera to an abandoned house, start shooting video, and be like, hey, look, there's a hole in the floor in that room, right?
Yeah.
We got to be on the lookout for that, right? It might, and you never know, that hole could be right there coming in the door, and hopefully it pings in their head and they get a little bit of experience from that they wouldn't otherwise get.
Yeah.
That's kind of my hope. That's kind of my hope with the training videos stuff, is not to pretend like I'm not RoboCop, but I get experience in stuff that other people don't. I really wish there were people doing the same thing as me in really nice neighborhoods that could tell me how to deal with the guy with $5 million in his CDs and his, he's out doing the S&P 500, and he's driving a Tesla around, and him and his old lady get into a fight, because I would love to know how to do that, just for side job potential in nice neighborhoods, but it's not something I have experience with.
Yeah, so I had that experience while working, because the town I worked in had both demographics, if you would. You had what you just explained, and then you also had the lower to lower middle income trailer parks and low income housing, Section 8. So it was
falling through the floor.
Yeah, seriously. So you really had, sometimes you would go from the trailer park call to the McMansion call, and you had to completely change your narrative, You had to change your approach. You had to change your tone. You had to change your, how you physically were going from a domestic at one to a domestic at another, So the out of control 12-year-old in the trailer park, you have to deal with very differently than the out of control 12-year-old in the $1 million mansion that has like in their room the PS5 and the Oculus and all that stuff. And it has lived a whole different life for 12 or 13 years on this planet than the kid in the trailer park. So, and you're right, it's an art. You can't teach that. It's almost like it just comes from being on the job. But I also noticed that some people who are on the job for an extended period of time, they never quite grasp it. They never quite understand like that let me say that skill, if you would, of, okay, how do you be the chameleon? How do you read the situation you're in, read the people you're speaking with? You see people from different ethnic backgrounds. In our town, we had people who were Asian, Chinese, Asian Indian, Middle Eastern. So you got to deal with because how they their let me say their religious or cultural things dealing with women and children are very different than the American way. So it was a lot of on the job training, but it was also a lot of, all right, let me figure out, let me learn, let me see, let me do some outside research too. Now, when it comes to your channel and the training, what's next? Like, what do you got going on right now that you're most excited about? I kind of want to, segue into that to close out. Let me say the next two segments are going to be what's next for you. What are you doing right now that you're most excited about, or something that you're working on in the future that you're most excited about? I know you're, working with some great brands, which is incredible. And then I want to segue that into the officer that wants to create something outside of the job. If you can give them a 30-second spiel about that. But first, what are you working on now? And what are you most excited about now? And where are you taking the channel and the business?
So with the channel, it's always, I want to build the educational content as much as I can. And so what I do is I have people that I know are commenting on videos the day that they're put out, those super fans, those people that are out there, and they have the bell notification on. As soon as the video comes out, they're watching it. And I'm always taking suggestions for them for new educational content. And a lot of it at this point, because I've covered many things that are related to like core knowledge of gear, a lot of it is kind of the tips and tricks types of stuff, how to deal with XYZ, things you wouldn't know about. So in the future, like as an example, for next month, one of my plans for a live stream is talking about danger areas of cars, because I know lots of cops could use a refresher on that, judging how many of us are getting run over a year. And it's not something that in the security industry they get any training on. You got people working in parking lots, standing right near the front wheel. I see it all the time. They'll stop a car and they're standing right near the front wheel of the car, where if somebody their foot slips off the brake and they're turning the wheel at the same time, they're going to go make a left turn, and their foot slips off the brake onto the gas, that security guard doing directing traffic is going to get run over. So I'm planning on doing a live stream talking about the danger areas of cars. And then I'm probably going to overlay that with a video of actual cars changing. Like this is, go out and point like, hey, this is the areas of car you got to be careful of. Here's why. When this wheel turns, it's not just the front of the car that turns, it's the side of the car that turns. You don't want to get thrown over by the back wheel either, right? Like, and then there's a danger zone directly behind the car. Here's why you don't want to stand between your car and the back end of the suspect's car when you're searching them. You want to be on that, where I'm at, the sidewalk side, right? Because normally the sidewalk where I'm working, like you want to be on the sidewalk side or the guardrail side, because if somebody rear ends the back of your car, you're just going to get smushed in between. Sucks for you and the bad guy. That type of thing. And that's kind of where I'm going with the channel. I've got a whole list of topics like that I think give people a little taste of experience. So when they come out on the road, they're not just doing, the academy says, pull them out of the car, bring them to the back of your car, search them. You're like, well, start using our brain. What's going to happen if we bring them to the back of the car and somebody hits, how many videos do we have? People slamming into the back of squad cars and the squad car going flying off the road. And everybody's like, well, that's on a highway. Yeah, but if you're one car length behind or two car lengths behind, somebody hits that squad at 35 miles an hour, it doesn't have to go flying through the air to crush you. You know, it doesn't have to fly through the air to crush your ankle. And then if it crushes your ankle, you're out of a job maybe forever.
Yeah.
You know, like who wants to go out on a disability 2 years on? You haven't even had fun yet 2 years on. Come on. Like, you know, like you haven't even been suspended yet at 2 years on. You haven't even lived yet at 2 years on. You haven't crashed your first squad car sideways into a pole yet. You want to retire now on an ankle getting run over? No, you don't want to do that. So I've got a bunch of those to do. There's always product videos, because there's products that every day, you know, that industry pushes further. There's apps out there for law enforcement that we've looked at before that we're going to look at in the future. There's new body armor technology coming out all the time. Vests are getting more protective and thinner and more comfortable all at the same time, but they seem to only go one of those directions. You know, and that's an interesting dynamic to talk to people about, especially people that, you know, if they've been on the job 5 years, you start showing them brand new stuff that just wasn't around 5 years ago when they were learning about soft body armor, and, you know, like blows their mind that you can now have flexible rifle plates, and you can have vests that are they're like 2 nickels thin. You know, they're 2 nickels thick.
Unbelievable.
You can change next to them and see how thin the vests have become these days, but they're still, you know, they still meet back face deformation standards, and people are amazed by that. Oh, how does it meet the back face deformation standards? Well, they still do, you know, and there's just a whole lineup of stuff. Some of the positives and negatives of brand new flashlight technology that comes out. I just put a video out yesterday about a flashlight where it's like, well, yeah, it's meeting all of these high-end standards. You know, as flashlights are putting more and more and more and more light out, you also, like, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. How long do you get that light output before it heats up too much and it starts stepping down?
Or the battery runs out.
Or the battery runs out, you know, like, and they're claiming things that then when you just, like, I don't have lab equipment, but I can turn a flashlight on and put it down on a table in a 68-degree room with a camera on it and be like, well, it says at 2.5 minutes it might step down, or you might get longer. Well, at 1 minute and 20, it's actually stepping down when used at 68 degrees. Now, what's it going to do when it's 90 out?